Hello, everyone. Welcome to Professor Messer's Network Plus Study Group for November of 2013. Thanks for joining us. This is our live study group that we do every month. I take your questions and I try to make sense of this whole Network Plus thing that we're going through. When we often go into these other areas where we start talking about other things, other ideas that we like to go through, other pieces that we like to discuss. I often go into a number of different segments to go off to the other side. If I can get my cameras going this morning, we'll be in very good shape. Let's see, we got one thing there, we got another thing there. For those of you that are watching on the stream, I was working on the stream and trying to get things going before the show and trying to get things in place. And of course, things broke again this morning. Can't do a live stream without having things break. So this live stream is about the same. That things are occasionally going wrong and going off, but we get through it. I've got a number of things to go through today. Everybody's been great about sending things through on the study group. As I mentioned, we do these every month, and I take all of your questions. So there's a lot that we do the rest of the month as well. This is a study group we're able to support through people that have purchased our downloadable series of videos. Of course, all of my videos are available for free. You can watch absolutely free on the internet every single minute of every single video. But some people like to take them off the internet, and if you want more information on that, you can find it at professormesser.com/download-network plus. Of course, you can also follow what we're doing during the week as well on Twitter, professormesser.com/Twitter, on YouTube at professormesser.com/YouTube. You would be surprised how much it helps for you to watch those videos and give them a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If some of you have wanted to give back to what we are doing here at Professor Messer, that's a great way to do it. Really helps quite a bit. So I want to thank everyone for doing that through the month as well. If you've never joined one of these study groups before, there's a lot that we do. There's a lot going on, a lot of topics we go through, a lot of details. You have a lot of study groups that we've previously done that you can go through. And so last month, for instance, we went through a number of topics. One of the topics was, can you explain how spanning tree protocol works? So if you put a question in to have that question answered this month, I won't be repeating that. You'll need to go back to the previous month. I like to have some new things at least every other month or so. If possible, could you give us a brief note on binary notation? How do you do the datagrams from your studio? How do those get from the studio, this video that you're watching now, how does it get to the live study group session? I'll talk about that if you watch the replay from last month. What percentage of Network Plus questions are performance-based, or does it vary? There are so many port numbers. Which ones are the must-know port numbers for the exam? And which certification needs to be done first, A+, Network Plus, or Security Plus? These are all the things that we went through. Now, if you are watching us live, and we certainly would recommend that you do that so you can talk to me directly and ask questions. If you're watching live, you can follow the chat. It's at the bottom of the page on professormesser.com/live. There's a chat room at the bottom for the live Network Plus study group. That's the one that I'm looking at. If you're watching us live on YouTube, I don't have that particular link up to be able to watch live chats, and YouTube doesn't give me a way to disable those. So I apologize if you're typing into that and I'm not responding to you. I just can't see it. Go to the professormesser.com site and you'll be able to chat at the bottom of the page. So there is quite a bit that we've gone through. We've had a few people that have already started calling in for this. I saw a couple come through. You'll also notice on professormesser.com/live that there is a call-in number. So you're more than welcome to call in to this. I also have a toll-free number for Skype users. You could Skype from anywhere in the world for free, and we'll take your calls directly here, and I'll try to answer them the best that I can. And we'll see if we can get some of your Network Plus questions answered. But I also ask you questions. And if you have a QR code reader on your phone, you loaded it up a year ago and you've been trying to figure out, how am I going to use this QR code reader? I have a solution for you. I have QR codes for you because I'm going to ask you questions and pop quiz questions throughout the study group. You can also just type into your browser vot.rs on your mobile device, or pop open another window on your computer and go to number 972984, and you'll be able to answer the question, how long have you been studying for your Network Plus certification? This is one of those things that you give me some feedback. And when you do that, you'll see that I will also pull them up on my screen so that we can track what's going on. So grab your QR code reader. You can take a snapshot of the screen and be able to see what's going on there. there is this is a way that I get to get feedback from you, so I can understand exactly what you've been doing. When I study for a certification exam, some that I've studied for weeks and I took the exam. Some took me a number of months. Some do take me over a year because I'll get started, I get redirected, I have to come back. It begins to be a little bit of a challenge sometimes to fit real life and certifications and your job and your family, and everything has to kind of combine around all of those things. So if you go to vot.rs and use the numbers 972984, this should take you to the right place, although this is an odd number. That number doesn't work. It's 72684. They changed it on me. Look, we're going to do something really quick here. Live streaming. 72684. It's interesting that they changed it on me overnight, although this could have been my doing entirely. Some of you did find it because that QR code reader will take you to the right place. Thanks for telling me that the number was wrong. I'm looking at it on my screen. It's obviously wrong. It's right in front of me. I can see on my screen, it says 72684. Duh. That's very obvious. So it looks like a few of you have found it now. So you can answer some of those again. And if some of you are also nice enough to put that into the chat, if somebody wouldn't mind doing that so that others could find it as well, that would be good. I've got pop quiz questions that I'm going to give you later on. So get your QR code readers ready. Get your extra browser screen ready to go, because I'll be asking you more specific questions that are along the lines of what you might be asked on the Network Plus certification exam. So it's a good opportunity to see how much you know. And then, of course, we'll talk about those things and go through those pieces as well. We've got quite a few people that have answered in, 9 team respondents. Now that you have the right number, shouldn't be too hard to get you on this piece. This is one of those things that is nice that I can get feedback from you to be able to get those things going. So it's nice to have that there. So that's quite a few. And usually when we do this at the beginning of a study group, I get a nice distribution. And it's really almost across the board. People have been studying for a long time. People have been studying for a very short time. So we welcome all of those to our study group to be able to get those. The idea of what we are doing with this study group is, I think, an interesting one. There's not a lot of places you can go to get just constant feedback on how you're doing. So one of those is a nice thing to have. We are, as I will remind you, the numbers to dial in are underneath the video page when you go to professormesser.com/live. So you're welcome to call in. Obviously, we don't take those calls after the show is over. That's something you'll have to do live. So if you're watching the replay, join us. You can go to professormesser.com/calendar. I've always got these slashes. I try to figure out what anybody could possibly need to know. /FAQ, /calendar, /live. And I try to do all of those things so that you can find that. And we got to have a good mix. So we have a lot of people that have been less than 3 months. We've got a number of people that have been over a year. So we've got quite a few that have really gone through this and tried to understand more about it. Now, if you're just getting into the Network Plus certification, you'll realize, of course, that this is a certification made by CompTIA. It is one that's not specific to a particular organization. It's not a manufacturer's exam. It's one where you need to know the basics of networking, so perhaps you can go take one of those manufacturer's exams. This Network Plus, this version of the Network Plus is called the N10005. So if you have some study materials and you're trying to study for this exam, make sure on the front of your study materials, your book, your study guides, whatever you have, that it is the N10005. That's pretty important. This was released December 1st, 2011, so it's been out for a while. We aren't expecting an update to this for another couple of years. Usually the update is out there for 3 or so years before it is even updated. But even then, the updates for Network Plus aren't very dramatic. Network technology does not really change quite as fast as, for instance, PC technology. You can have newer systems really come out in a number of years, although the networking protocols are exactly the same on those. So it's one of those things where once you know the basics of networking, you'll find the exams don't change very much. So you may be able to get away if you have an N10004 book, you might be able to get away with that. Just make sure you look at the exam objectives so that you have the latest things that you'll need to know. The latest version, for instance, added things like virtual networking. There were additions to the OSI model. There were additions to security, a lot of security additions on this. So that's another thing you'll need to know about this. As I mentioned, there's about a 3-year overlap. Even if you started studying and CompTIA came out with a new version, they usually have a 9-month to 12-month period where you can take either exam. So don't feel like you have to wait for the exam to get renewed to finally start working with it. They've already thought of that. So you can continue to work on your current version. And regardless of what version you happen to be using, you'll be able to go through and really work with the version that makes sense for you. And you don't have to jump in and suddenly you don't know the things that are going on. Let's talk a little bit about some new things on the Professor Messer website. There's a new study group new study guide that I have. I've taken every graphic, every image, a lot of the text from my slides. People said, I need this information, but I don't have $200 to pay for the course, for the PDFs. I just need the things that were in your slides. So I put them all together. I got some desktop publishing software. I copied, I pasted, I added. Actually, there's new content in here that's not in any of my slides. This is the N10005 Network Plus Study Guide from Professor Messer. So it has subnetting and encryption technologies, and I've got proxy information and all the things you would expect to see in my study guide. And it's just a PDF that you can download, and I've made it available on my website for $10. So it's something that I think a lot of people can obtain and be able to work with. If you were to look at this study guide, there is a lot here. See if I can bring it up on my screen so you can kind of see what you would expect to get if you have this. There we go. So here's the study guide. It's got all these things that I've added from my videos. A lot of things, a lot of pieces are in here. The wireless, the encryption, the overlapping information. I tried to fit everything into it and squeeze it all in. This is something that a lot of people said, I want to contribute to your website. People have been so nice and said, we want to help support what you're doing. The website itself, just the hosting costs are about $1,000 a month. So it costs quite a bit to keep ProfessorMesser.com/going. There's so many people hitting it. I have to have multiple servers and load balancers and on and on and on. So it takes quite a bit to keep things running. And this is just no way. People said, I want to donate, but I don't accept donations. I think this is probably a good solution for that. Give people something they can take with them. And I think something you can use to really, really help with your studies. You can find out about that, ProfessorMesser.com/NetSG, Net Study Group, or Net Study Guide in NetSG. And there's a link just under the video on the live page, so you can find that easy and be able to get to that. And a lot of people have already seen this. I haven't even talked about this yet. I haven't tweeted about it. I finished this a couple of days ago. We talked about it on the chat room that's always 24/7 at the bottom of my site. And some people downloaded it and tried it out, and they really liked it. In fact, they found a typo, and I got in there and I fixed it. So if I ever add anything, if I need to fix anything, if anything needs to be changed with this or added to it, those changes and additions will always go in here for the N10005. So a lot of very, very useful information there, I think. So you're welcome to take advantage of that. And thanks so much for your support so far with those pieces. Well, let's jump into your questions. We've got a lot going on today. And I'll remind you that we have that dial-in number. You can call in to 347-989-8745. And I've also got a number for Skype. You can dial in at 855-235-4742. Those lines are there and available. I've got a bunch of lines there, so hopefully you're not going to find a busy signal with those pieces. So I've got a question for you. Get your QR code reader ready. Do not answer this in the chat room. Here's something for everyone. And the question is, which of these would be most associated with AAA, AAA, we call it in the industry? Which of these? And I'm going to check and make sure that my VOT.RS number is correct and see if, no, it is correct. That's good. Okay, so you can go to VOT.RS and type in 319223 to answer this particular question. I've got 4 possible answers for you. So what is AAA? Does that have something to do with encryption? Does it have something to do with remote access? Is there something related to optical fiber, or is this TCP/IP related? So you can find out about one of those things. So try to give a guess as to what you think it is, and we're going to vote right now. I've got that QR code up. I'm going to leave it up a couple more seconds so you can scan it in with your mobile device. There were a number of you that caught that mobile device that I didn't realize so many people were using the QR code reader. Whenever I'm pasting this onto the page, I'm wondering if I'm getting it right. And it's always useful to know that people are taking advantage of that. So I'll keep posting that QR code reader into the mix. The idea of being able to understand AAA came from a question that was sent in. I usually, when you register for these things, I give you the option. In fact, I require that you give me a question. Some of you say, I don't have a question this month, and that's fine. Some of you say, here's a question that I have, and I try to apply that back to these. So I have 100 or so questions to go through and understand those pieces of what we do. We obviously can't go through all of them, but I try to get through as many as possible. But I also take questions from Facebook, from Twitter, from the chat room that's 24/7, as I mentioned at the bottom of the Professor Messer website. There's always somebody there that has questions like that to be answered. So let's see what the results are. Let's flip over and have a look at the question of which of these would be most associated with AAA. And if we look at the results, let's see what you said. And you said that the answer between encryption, remote access, optical fiber, and TCP/IP. Here's one where nobody said optical fiber, but I had a bunch of people say encryption. A bunch of people said remote access. A bunch of people said TCP/IP. So this will be a good one. So this will be a nice learning opportunity for all of us. It's not a term that you hear a lot in networking and or in security. That sort of leans a particular direction or another. The question really came about because someone came in and asked the question of what's the difference between Radius and TACACS Plus. If you look at the Network Plus, the exam objectives, that's one thing that's asked of you of what are these things. And I should have put even more in here. There's other ways to use authentication on a network, and it's Radius and TACACS Plus that does it. This is what we are doing with Radius and TACACS, among other things, is to be able to authenticate into the network. This is something we do all the time. It's done in so many different ways. These are some very standardized ways. So imagine on your network, you've got a bunch of routers, you got a bunch of switches, there are firewalls, there are a lot of different components that you will be managing as a network professional. And all of these devices require that you have to get into them and manage them. You have to change switch port settings. You have to modify routes in your router. You have to add and remove firewall rules. So at any point during the day, you're moving all over the place. You're logging into this device. You're logging into that device. Maybe you're logging into a centralized manager which manages those devices. The manager of the manager that manages those devices. And so it really becomes a little bit of a challenge to be able to manage these, to log into them. Imagine if every single one of them had a different username and a different password to be able to log in. That would be a bit of a challenge. So when we talk about AAA, we're really talking about this remote access to the systems. These are standardized ways to log in. The AAA stands for authentication, authorization, and accounting. And people will use other terms along these. Sometimes there will be a fourth A inside of that piece. But for the Network Plus exam, this is probably the most common way that you'll hear about this, because this is the process that instead of having a separate username and password for all of these separate devices, you can use a single username and password for all of these devices. And there is a centralized authentication server somewhere that has that single username and password. Sometimes this is integrated into a larger name services like Active Directory. Sometimes this is a standalone server where you've just set up your username and password for your infrastructure devices, and that's the one that you'll be able to use. But how do you get the switch and the router and the firewall to be able to talk to some authentication server somewhere else on your network and have it all understand what's going on? Well, you do that through standardized protocols, a standard way of setting this up. And of course, there are multiple standards, one of which is the TACACS, one of which is the Radius. You've got other ways. Kerberos is another way to do this, but they're all around the idea of authentication. So they're checking your credentials. They're looking at your authorization. Do you have access to log into this device? And if you do, what type of access do you have? And of course, the logging the access time so that somebody can go back and audit this to determine who logged into that device and what changes did they make. That's where we get the term AAA. So that's where that's coming from. The idea behind this is that just have one password, one login to be able to do everything, which has, of course, its own advantages and disadvantages. And that, of course, is where you can also combine other things where you might have a third piece of information, maybe something you've got your, like I have on my desk, I've got my PayPal token. So nobody can get into my PayPal unless they have this token and they have the token generated password on there, or they're bringing up my Blizzard code, so I can't get into World of Warcraft unless I have that code. You can see it's just as important to get into World of Warcraft as it is the PayPal. So important to be able to do that, isn't it? Let's now look at how this might look in the real world. So here's a very common setup on someone's network. You've got a lot of things everywhere on here. You've got remote access clients. Maybe your end users are logging in via a VPN or through a remote access gateway. They need to use a username and password. It'd be nice if it linked back to your name services so they wouldn't have to have a separate username and password. Great. Maybe you've got wireless client devices. At the bottom of the screen is the wireless devices on your network. It'd be nice if there was a centralized database for them. Almost everybody is centralizing everything back to a name services. So it's either an LDAP-based database or it's an Active Directory database, which indeed is LDAP-based as well. And it all goes back to a server. I have it on this screen on the far right up near the top, a separate server, but it could be just a service that's running on a machine. So it could be in a domain controller for Active Directory that has on it this radius functionality, this radius service, or this TACACS service. So I've been talking a little bit about radius. I've been talking about radius and TACACS as this sort of weird name that we've just thrown out there, but there are standards along these things. TACACS stands for Terminal Access Control System. Terminal Access Controller Access Control System. This is something that was a remote authentication protocol. It's been around for quite some time. It was created so that you can have access to different devices in ARPANET. So that should give you an idea of just how long this particular protocol has been around and been changed. Cisco grabbed this protocol and said, this is great. We should use this for our routers and our switches. And they updated it called XTACACS. They ultimately changed it to the latest version of this, and it's proprietary to Cisco, which is TACACS Plus, which is one that generally works with Cisco devices. So Cisco has a TACACS Plus server. That TACACS Plus server communicates with these Cisco devices. They're configured to use that, and that's how you're able to authenticate to those, which is great. If all you have is Cisco, and that's all you'll ever connect to, that's great. But you also have challenges if you want to do Radius. Radius is another very standardized way of doing authentication, very similar scenario to TACACS, but Radius is set up to be able to use a standard. So if it's not Cisco related, pretty much every other device in the world uses Radius. And indeed, Cisco devices can also use Radius as well for the most part. So generally, we sometimes will see a mixture. You'll have a single server that can talk TACACS Plus and Radius because there are minor differences between those, and there might be a good reason that you'd want to use TACACS Plus that goes outside the scope of the Network Plus certification. But just keep in mind that those are very standardized ways to do this. So one of the questions that comes up as you're working with these things is if you've ever logged into a service that is on the net, a web server, on the back end, as you're putting in your username and password, it might be using Radius or it might be using TACACS to actually do that authentication. Authentication on the web is an enormous challenge. We've seen this recently. If you go out just this past month and you go out to, I like to read the Naked Security blog from Sophos, which is an exceptional security blog. We're kind of getting into the security side of our talk today. As you recall during the last month, or maybe you didn't hear about this, Adobe had an enormous hack, an enormous breach of security, and millions and millions of user records were obtained from Adobe. And there was a nice write-up on this on the Naked Security blog, where they went through and really detailed how this happened. If you'd like to read about this, I have a URL you can go to at bit.ly/AdobeOops, Adobe OOPS. And they talked about the challenge that Adobe had with the authentication. Even worse, though, they talked about how they were storing the passwords. And from a security perspective, the storage of the passwords on Adobe site, on one of the major websites in the world, was really not doing best practices when it came to storing your secure information. This is really, really an enormous problem. Adobe had to change every password, had to clear out every single password, reset them all, and have you type in a new one. And they haven't said, or at least I haven't read on what they may have changed about this, but instead of hashing, they were instead doing encryption of the passwords, which from a best practices perspective with passwords is a no-no. I have another set of videos on hashing. We won't get into the details of that during the main study group today, but you're more than welcome to go out and watch those videos on hashing. Maybe if we have time afterwards, we can always look at those as well on the after show. We do another show. I do two shows. We do this show, and then I do another one where it's a little more casual afterwards. What a great overview of this. If you wanted to get an insight into why you would hash a password, and more importantly, why you would have a salted hash, which it goes a little bit beyond the requirements you need for Network Plus, but it's an important consideration when you're talking about storing passwords and how do they keep passwords as something that is very, very private, very inaccessible to anyone else. And a salted hash is the way that you would do that. So just an interesting read. If you're looking for something to really go through, it is probably the nicest write-up that I've seen on the Adobe breach, and something that you can really get a feel for what's going on. Well, let's change our shift a little bit from security. We'll move off to our to networking, a little bit more networking. I'll also remind you we have the dial-in lines available at 347-989-8745. If you're on Skype, you can call for free, 855-235-4742. Those numbers at the bottom of the video on the ProfessorMesser.com/live page. And if you're using Skype and you're somewhere outside the United States, or you just don't want to use minutes on your phone, that number for Skype is absolutely free. Costs you no Skype minutes. You don't need any special Skype account to be able to use that, which is nice as well. So let's get your QR codes reader. Again, no answering this in the chat room to be able to use it. I want to be able to have everybody have a good chance at this one. And before I give you the number, I want to make sure on my side that the numbers are correct. Let me do a double check so I don't have to fix this after I'm done. And it is correct. Let's give you the numbers there. What's the minimum category of cable to support 100 megabit Ethernet? You have to know categories of cables. No answering this in the chat room, please. If you go to VOT.RS, number 472842. And I give you options of Cat 3, Cat 5, Cat 5e, Cat 6, and Cat 6a. I give you 5 that you have to choose from to determine which is faster. And be able, or which will support that fast speed of 100 megabit Ethernet on here. There's quite a lot to deal with when you're dealing with cabling. If you're bringing up a new cable infrastructure and you're putting new cables into your data center or on a floor, these are important things to know. What type of cable should I buy? What type of piece should I have available? That's a pretty important piece of this. And so it's important to understand what the options might be for the speeds that you need in an organization. Or maybe you get into a building and there's cable already and you see a certain category of cable. What am I able to do with this category of cable? So those things are really, really useful to know. I see some folks are already out there and voting on those things. We'll see. We've got 7 respondents in here so far. So it's important to know what that category is, and not only important to know for what you're doing in your normal work life, but it's also important to know for the exam, which is, of course, the most important part of what we're doing here, is trying to figure that out for what we'll know for our Network Plus certification. So we've got 35 respondents so far who said, I think I know what category of cable, what's the minimum category that I would need to be able to support 100 megabit Ethernet. Let's see what everyone listed there. And it looks like I wasn't fooling too many people with this. Indeed, Cat 5 is the correct one. There is one of those things that really helps quite a bit when you're dealing with those. And you've got Cat 3, Cat 5, Cat 5e, Cat 6, Cat 6a, and of course, most of you said Cat 5. Now, Cat 3, Cat 5e, looks like we have a few people wondering, well, maybe it's one of those. Let's step through and try to figure out what the options really might be for these things. The question that really came in this month is, which is faster, Cat 5 or Cat 6? And RM asked this, and it's really a good question. I think what he was really asking, or she was really asking, was what are the speeds supported on these? But the question came out, which is faster, Category 5 or Category 6? So it might be worthwhile to step through categories and understand what the options are with the categories. The options on this are the reason we have categories themselves are because there's standards around Ethernet cabling. There's lots of standards around cabling. These happen to be the ones from Ethernet that come from the Electronic Industries Alliance, EIA. So you've heard this EIA, TIA before. That's one side of it. The TIA is the Telecommunications Industry Association. So these are the folks that create standards for cabling, especially for people that need to implement cabling into your environment. Cabling is a science unto itself. There's a real challenge associated with that. So if we look at some of the options available for copper cable categories, we can have a look at these. So if you have something like Category 3, we can do 10 megabit Ethernet. We can do 4 megabit token ring. That was one of the very first categories that was created for cabling. There is a Category 1, I believe, for voice, but obviously we don't do a lot of single voice. If you're going to put a cable into a building, you really wouldn't put Category 1. That was one of the legacy categories that was left there. Category 5, the answer to our question, supports up to 100 megabit per second Ethernet. Now, you notice the categories themselves are standards. The cable isn't what's faster. So to that question that was asked by, that we got in was which is faster, Cat 5 or Cat 6? The cables themselves have no speeds associated with them. The networking technologies we put onto the cables are what determines the speeds. And for a Category 5, we can go that fast. For Category 5e, we've got speeds up to 1 gig Ethernet, and there's quite a number of specifications. Most people are putting in at least Cat 5e. These days, generally, we see Cat 6. That's what most people will put in because that is the highest end and most reasonable. Not a lot of people doing 10 gig over Cat 6, but you can do it over a certain distance. So there is some challenges there. There is an enhanced version, and a Cat 6a that I don't have on this particular. Yeah, I do have. I have a bullet on that, Cat 6a, if you want to do longer 10 gig. So there's some interesting copper technologies. Now, this is just copper. The categories are only dealing with copper wire that we're putting into our networks. There's a whole different set of standards for fiber. But if you're studying for your Network Plus exam, you'll need to know both the copper and the fiber. We didn't talk about fiber in this particular review. This particular question that came in, we're only dealing with the copper piece. So you'll notice that some people are asking on there, this particular picture showing the twists in the cable. The twists are pretty important. It's kind of hard to see here, but this is a Cat 6. There are minor differences between the twists that are on there and the cablings that are on those pieces. If you're trying to look at a cable and figure out which cable is this, there is some writing that's right on the cable. You should look at yours. Here's one that I just grabbed off the floor of my office yesterday and took a picture. And it even says it's ETL verified. ETL is a third-party organization that verifies that certain cable is really what the manufacturer says it is. And it says that it is verified to be in TIA EIA 568B. It's a 2-1 UDP Category 6. So if I'm looking at this, the differences in the categories you can sometimes find right on the cable itself. Many cables, especially that are being implemented into environments, will even have a number after that designates how long this particular cable has been. So you can look at one side that's in a wall and another side that's coming out on the other side and look at, so most of the time it's in feet or yards in the United States. I don't know. Do they do meters in the UK? They probably do, and elsewhere in the world. So it gives you an idea of exactly how long that cable is without having to get out a piece of equipment or somehow determine where that cable happened to wind around inside of the wall. Kind of a nice way to do that as well. There is a lot to cabling. A lot of people don't do cabling because cabling is hard. If you don't do it right, the entire network, everything you do on the network becomes a bit of a challenge. So you often get into these situations where we don't want to do cabling. It becomes a little bit more complex, complicated to be able to get into a cabling piece and do something with it. Then some folks in the chat room are even saying, I have UTP, I have untwisted pair, non-shielded cabling all throughout my office. My studio here has so many different components that are inside of it. I have multiple devices. You can't see it, but underneath is where all my equipment is. There are racks that are underneath the desk where my video switcher is, and video matrix switch, and additional computers, and hard drive arrays, and all kinds of things. So I've got a lot of equipment. And it's nice to have that twisted pair, the unshielded twisted pair. I said untwisted pair earlier, but unshielded twisted pair. To have that there because the twists keep out a lot of the interference that you would have in an environment like this. So I don't have to have shielded. I don't have anything in here that's a big motor that's putting out these enormous electromagnetic pulses. If I did, I would need something that was shielded to be able to do that. But the unshielded twisted pair works perfectly for an environment like me. I even run my audio over UTP. This microphone that you see here is connected to a device that converts it to just an RJ45 connection and then plugs into the audio system that I use that does everything at that point. It converts it from this analog signal into IP. So I'm sending the analog over RJ45 unshielded twisted pair even. So it's quite a bit. And I think everything that I have in here is Cat 6. It just happened to be that's the easiest one to buy. I'm not doing anything that's above gigabit speeds. Everything in my office here is connected via gigabit. So it's pretty important when I'm moving a lot of data back and forth that I have all of those things to work with. I want to take a moment and talk to you about a lot of questions I got this month around performance-based questions. If you've noticed with the Network Plus certification, a lot of the questions that are there now at the very beginning, you'll get 3, 4, 5, 6 questions that make you do something. They force you into performing a particular function. For instance, we were just looking at categories. They might give you, I'm going to make one up. I have no idea what these questions are they give you, but they may give you different speeds or different categories, and they may have you match in what the speeds are. There's a good performance-based question for you. It's not a multiple choice, but it does require that you know the answer to some of these questions that we've been working with. There may be questions that ask you to perform a troubleshooting function. You have to use ping and traceroute. You have to be able to perform a dig or an NS lookup. Those are things you have to know for your Network Plus certification. Now, if you don't have a lot of equipment, you don't have a big network, and you want a way to be able to do this, there is a way through something GTS Learning offers called Freestyle. They have Freestyle Live Practice Labs available, where these are labs that you can step through live and be able to work with the technologies. I think I have one running here. I'm on my GTS Learning page. Let's pull that up so you can see. This is my Freestyle page. Now, I was working with this morning. I was going through my courses. I was pulling up the Network Plus course and being able to work with, pick the wrong thing there. Let's go through my courses and my Network Plus. So I've got not only all the GTS Learning books that are online, all the books on the OSI model, in fact, all their study notes and review questions are right here. So if you wanted to see the actual book, instead of purchasing the book from GTS Learning, the whole thing is online. I could work with it here. And if you happen to also have the labs, you can go through and work with the Network Plus labs as well. There's a lot to go through with the labs. They have a lot that are here. Here's the Network Plus N10005. make this a little bit bigger for you. Configuring the network adapter, IP address configurations, ARP and packet analysis, configuring routing, port scanning, name resolution. We were just talking about running dig and NS lookup. And there is an entire lab here, if I set my resolutions here, where you can step through performing all of those functions. This one's got 6 different steps associated with it. And the nice part about this here, they're running packet captures. There's information on here to be able to connect and perform these functions live on a network that isn't yours. You can't mess anything up. And they have virtual servers that are on this page. I can power up these servers on this page, make it so I can see these a little bit better. Got these at a very high resolution. I'm just powering up all of these devices, and now they're starting up the entire set of virtual machines that's already pre-configured and running. I love that part of it. And it takes you through step by step what you can do to be able to learn this particular, in this case, name resolution function. These servers then allow you to, through this remote connection that they have here, to be able to access those and do things with them. So you can connect to these pieces, and I'm not even running anything fancy on my machine. I've got just a standard browser that runs HTML5. Generally these days, a lot of the newer browsers do. So I don't have to load Java. I don't have to have any fancy plugins enabled. I can simply connect to devices, and it pops up a new screen, and it goes through and remotely connects me to this machine. Here I am on this device. So this is a live device that's running somewhere in the world, and I'm simply connected to it. Here's Wireshark. I can start up my Wireshark screen, and I can start capturing packets with it. So what a great way to go through and learn these things without having to know how to do anything. I can simply just, boom, now I'm capturing packets. It's that easy. These live labs are also priced extremely well. If we go and look at the options available here, they've set up some special options for us that are $99 if you follow the link at professormesser.com/netlab. So if this is something that you want more hands-on, you're not really sure where to get the hands-on from, I get 10, 12 messages, 15 messages every month about doing hands-on labs and being able to work with them. This might be a good way for you to try it. They also have a free trial, so you can try it yourself for an hour and see if it's something you would like to do. You don't have to invest your money and then realize, this didn't quite work out the way I expected. Instead, you can try it yourself and see what happens. Just follow that link at professormesser.com/netlabs. And of course, we thank GTS Learning for their support of what we're doing at Professor Messer, and thank them for sponsoring this Network Plus study group. We have a lot more information to go through. I'm now 15 minutes until the top of the hour. We are going through it and making sure we get those things done. I have other questions for you. I'm going to bring up another question. So get your QR code reader ready. But I'm noticing on my side that the numbers didn't match up on my piece. Do I even have this one here? I don't. So I'm just going to ask you, I'm going to find an old one here and be able to pull this one up. Let's find, in fact, I do have one that we can use that actually works perfectly for this particular question that came in. Let me first give this to you. I'm going to pop up the QR code on here so that you'll be able to see this and see if I can get this done properly. There we go. So here's the QR code reader. The question is, what is DHCP? That's the real question I have for you. DHCP, the options that I have for you, is it a method of automatic network addressing? Is it a storage media file system? Is it a memory transfer protocol? Or is it a blogging engine? Do not answer in the chat room. You should instead hit that QR code reader or go to vot.rs and go to 865575, 865575, and those pieces there. There is a lot around the idea of using DHCP and working with DHCP in the network, so it's an important part. In fact, you're going to be using this all the time in your particular environment. As you do more and more and more, you'll be able to work with that. So go to vot.rs. We got a few respondents that are typing those things in right now. The number 865575. It's kind of hard to see on the screen there. Let's see how close I can get with the QR code reader. There we go. And it is a little darker there as I've got that in place. All right, I'm going to get rid of the QR code reader. I think some of you can do that pretty quick. So 865575 at vot.rs. The questions and being able to do this is through a third party called Mentimeter. Mentimeter. So if you wanted to do some for your presentations, you have something that you'd like to be able to do, and you'd like to throw some fun quizzes and other things in there, it's absolutely free. I can't believe it's free. There are additional premium pieces that you can purchase with this. I'm not at all associated with Mentimeter. I just love what they're doing with this. It's a really nice capability. So one of those things. Let's see what people have said about DHCP. Boy, I fooled nobody. Everybody got that one right. 52 people have said, oh, it's automatic network addressing. Well, of course it is automatic network addressing. Everybody knows DHCP apparently. Fooled nobody with that one. The question that came in about DHCP was really one about how to troubleshoot DHCP. So let's talk about troubleshooting. I have new material for you. I have new slides that I created just for this study group so we can step through this piece. The question really came in from David, who said, how would you know if a gateway wasn't working, wasn't configured properly, or DHCP wasn't configured properly? What steps do you go through to even get to that point to understand where the problem happens to be? So before we get into the actual troubleshooting of DHCP and the steps you would go through to troubleshoot an internet connection, a network connection, a DHCP connection, which, by the way, are identical on every network you'll ever go to. When I sit down and configure a new piece of equipment, I go through exactly the same troubleshooting steps that I'm going to tell you about here. So let's go through these pieces. First thing, let me take you through DHCP. There are different options that DHCP takes. Whenever we plug in a machine, it's automatic for us. We don't even think about what's going on behind the scenes, but there's many steps that are involved for DHCP to be able to work. The first one is your machine has to be able to find a DHCP server. So it has to go out and be able to send a broadcast, because remember, it doesn't have an IP address. So it just sends this broadcast out with no IP address out to the world using a UDP packet over port 67 and says, hey, can somebody please, if you're a DHCP server, I'm looking for you. And because it's a broadcast, a switch is going to broadcast it out every single interface because you're on a broadcast domain. On that picture I showed you, notice it hit a router and the broadcast went past the router. Wait a second. I read my Network Plus materials. Broadcasts don't go through routers. But in that picture we just looked at, can I back this up? Let's back this up. I'll show you. Watch as it goes through, goes to my router, and it passes through the router. That's not a mistake. That router has been configured with something called a DHCP relay, because you probably only have 1 or 2 or 3 DHCP servers on your entire network. You usually have more than one for redundancy's sake. But these are not commonly on the user's subnet. They're in a data center somewhere. They have to step through a number of routers, perhaps, to get to the DHCP server. To be able to do that, because it's a broadcast from a device that has no IP address, we have something specially designed on these devices like routers, like firewalls, that is called a DHCP relay. It says if I see anything coming in that's a DHCP request, it's discovering, a DHCP discover has gone out, I'm going to take that, and I've already told the relay, just send those directly to these set of DHCP servers. So the relay's smart. The relay says, oh, that's a broadcast. I'm now going to convert that to a unicast and send it directly to the DHCP server. And I'm going to put some special information inside of that packet to say where it came from, so you can not only send it back to me, but I'll put in there other information about the subnet and other things. Some people and some manufacturers will call this a DHCP helper. You'll hear that term. So DHCP relay, DHCP helper, there's other terms that you'll see as well, but it's doing exactly the same thing. It's passing through these DHCP messages. Now, once the servers had gotten that DHCP message, they now need to report back with something called the DHCPOFFER. Because there's multiple DHCP servers, we don't want to have anybody lock it in, because then you have a conflict associated with this. What you have is everybody who's a DHCP server says, oh yeah, I've got an IP address for you. I'm going to send that in to you so that you can then choose which one you'd like to use. And your client receives a bunch of options. And now it can decide what IP address it would like to use. Notice that that was also sent through a broadcast. It's a separate port, a UDP port 68. It's sent on a broadcast because, again, your workstation doesn't yet have an IP address. It would never be able to receive a unicast quite right. So the next step is your client workstation looks through all the offers and says, well, here's a nice one. I'm going to take this offer. And it sends that message again through a broadcast on UDP 67 up to the DHCP server. And obviously not sending it to the server, but really sending it everywhere. And the server is going to hear that particular request saying, okay, I've gotten all the list. I want that IP address, please. And at that point, the server says, great, you're locked in. I'm now going to send an acknowledgement back to you called the DHCPACK. And again, it's sending it on a broadcast because you don't have an IP address yet on UDP 68. And now finally, you've got an IP address that's locked in. The DHCP server knows that you've been given that address, and you now are receiving acknowledgement, and you're locking it into your machine. And now you have an IP address. That 4-step process happens every single time. It's automatic. It's like an automatic door. You walk up to it, it happens. You plug in your machine, it happens. So that discover, the offer, the request, and the acknowledgement all 4 times should be occurring. So this becomes a bit of a challenge, doesn't it? What if you don't get a DHCP address? What if you don't get an address? This address shows up as an API-PA, an automatic IP address that is given when you don't have a DHCP server or get a response from a DHCP server on your network. Becomes a little bit more of a challenge, doesn't it? We should step through some troubleshooting with those things. The chat rooms folks are asking, so who runs the DHCP server? Ideally, the folks running the DHCP server is your network administration team. Sometimes it's a security team. It's someone who has a server. Usually this is something that runs, if you're in a Microsoft environment, it runs on a Microsoft Active Directory server. It could run on a separate server all by itself as well. There are also third-party DHCP servers that you could purchase for other examples as well. Those types of things are very common to see and to have available. One of the challenges you have from a network perspective, sometimes someone will come into your network and turn on another DHCP server, a rogue DHCP server. Sometimes this is done accidentally. Some people will enable it, and now it's giving out maybe IP addresses that aren't even on your network anywhere, or it's conflicting with addresses that are already on your network. There is also challenges when somebody's trying to do this because they are malicious. They want to give out some IP addresses from this DHCP server and also provide access to a network that they might have access to. Another thing from a security perspective you have to watch out is someone who sucks up all the DHCP addresses and leaves you with none in your DHCP pools. That's one common way that people can provide a denial of service on your network, by using up every DHCP address. Normally, DHCP servers will have methods in place to prevent those types of things from occurring, but it's always a concern from a security perspective. There is a sanity check that we can go through, though. The sanity check is really 4 steps that you can go through to see how it's working for you. First step would be to have a look at your local address information. So we would look at, for instance, information that is on our local machine. We'd do an IP config or an if config if you were in Linux, and we would check our IP address, and we would see if our IP address was one that has an IP address, a gateway, and a subnet mask. Did we receive a DHCP address? So if we have an address assigned to us, we know DHCP worked. If it didn't, then we can go try to figure out why we can't talk to the DHCP server, and we'd obviously have to use another workstation that already has access to the network to be able to do that. I would think that that is your first step. So if we were going to do that, let's see if I can show this on my screen. I wonder if I even have an address on my screen. If I do an IP config on my network, I do have a network address, 10.1.10.59. I just went into Windows and performed my IP config with no details on it. I didn't do an IP config /all, but I certainly could. I've got both an IPv6 link local address because I've got IPv6 configured on this device, and 10.1.10.59 is the IP. So I know at least DHCP is working. If I got an API-PA address, I don't have those slides in here, but if we've been given that range of addresses for API-PA, then I don't think I have those on here. No, I don't. That is something that's always a warning sign. The API-PA is your link local or your automatic private IP addressing that you would get. And if you see an IP address in there that is 169.254.1.1 or 1.0 for the network, all the way through 169.254.254.255, you see those, and it's a common warning sign, like, oh boy, we have an API address, we have an automated link local address on here, then that's a warning sign, and you can realize then I didn't get a DHCP address. But if you look at the address we got, it's 10.1.1059. And I know I got that via DHCP. If I do an IP config all, we can get more information about this. Let's scroll up to this. In fact, it says, is DHCP enabled? Yes. So that is indeed where that came from. In fact, you can see when the lease was obtained and when the lease is due to expire. So that tells me, yeah, DHCP is working. Now, the address that it gave me, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's working, that I'm able to communicate with anything. So the next step with this, if we look at my list, now that we have checked the local address, is to ping the gateway. The gateway is on your local subnet. So it's always going to be something that doesn't have to go through a router. We don't have to worry about routing tables. We don't have to worry about it going outside the scope of where we are on our local network. I just want to ping the gateway, and my gateway is 10.1.10.1. I've got a private 10.network here, 10.1.10.1. Now, we could have done also something in the middle of this. We could have pinged our local address just to confirm that our stack is running, but if you've already received a DHCP address, we can almost assume at that point everything's fine with IP. We can go to the next step and see if we can talk to other devices on our network, and the gateway should certainly be a device that's there. If we can't ping, I got responses back on mine. Yep, we're good. I can ping my gateway. If we were not able to ping our gateway, either the gateway is down. That's obviously a concern. We've been given an IP address. Perhaps the gateway is configured not to respond back to pings, which is also something your security team might set up. Or you may have been given the wrong gateway. Maybe it's a different IP address and your DHCP server was never set up with the correct information. So there's another few things that we can now check to see. If we do know of another IP address on this network and we know that it's something that's pingable, we might want to ping around to other devices as well. So I'm good. I can at least ping my local gateway. At this point, you have a couple of choices available to you. If you really wanted to see if you could get through the router and not have to worry about routing tables, because local routes on a router are always available, we could ping the other side of our gateway. Now, this implies that you know what IP address is on the other side of the gateway, and quite honestly, most people don't know what that is. You would have had to be the guy that set up the router to be able to know that, or at least have some type of intelligence about how this network was designed to begin with. So generally, that third step of pinging the other side of the gateway isn't done unless you're setting up the gateway right now and you're going through that troubleshooting process. So generally, we skip to this last piece, which is, well, if I can get to my local gateway, let's see if I can route to somewhere else. So I might try to route to a separate server, maybe that's local on my network, or just go right out to the internet. If I'm trying to troubleshoot internet connectivity, maybe I just want to ping 8.8.8.8. That's Google's DNS servers. Those are generally available. And of course, I'm able to ping that. Now I've gone through the troubleshooting process I needed to be able to determine that that's there. And all I did was pings. That's really all it took to troubleshoot that piece, to be able to have it there. That's really one of the challenges. So you can have problems throughout this entire process. Your DHCP server could be misconfigured by your network management team. I've been there, done that. So it might have the wrong information on it. So now we have to fix the DHCP server and release our lease and renew it again. So again, that's that Windows piece of the IP config. We used IP config and we used ping here. So for IP config, if we wanted to IP config, I'm going to do a /?. So there's IP config renew, IP config release. These are good things to know. I used IP config /all. Those are the command line pieces, the switches that we would need to know for this. So IP config /release. Let me think about what I'm doing here. Yes, we should be able to release that. You notice now, no IP configuration. I've only got my link local information here now. I've got no IP addresses on this particular device. I would have to do an IP config renew, goes back to the DHCP server, goes through that 4-step process again, and now renews it. And because I was already registered there, it gave me back my same IP address as before. That's what your DHCP server is designed to do. If it can give you the same IP, it absolutely will. So that's a nice set of IP config settings that can help you troubleshoot. If somebody's changed the DHCP server, release it and renew it again to update it and maybe get a new IP address or fix problems with the IP address that's there as well. So quite a bit to step through. Let me see questions that may have come in the chat room. Yes, many of you have noticed that that in my configuration, this is not my computer. It's Rodney McKay's machine. It's from the Auxiliary Control Center in Atlantis. My particular domain on my network is the SG1 domain, and I've got other subdomains there for Atlantis and of course for Cheyenne. That's what that machine is. I did have somebody call me Rodney after a study group. That's not my name. That's just what I put on here for those pieces. So you'll notice my network all using the 10 dot private addresses. That may be a question you get in your Network Plus about private addressing. The 10 dot address, the 172.12 slash 162.16/12 network, the 192.168. Those are important things to know as well for those standard private addressing schemes, which is what I'm using here. And I'm doing natting to get out to the internet. That's one of those things. You notice the chat room's going, I'm releasing the IP address. I wanted to be sure I wasn't connecting to this with a remote desktop, because I have a lot of machines in here. I will connect via remote desktop. If you connect remote desktop and you release your IP address, you have no way to get to the machine. So that's an important consideration to be able to get there and be able to do those things. The piece that I work with here regarding this, the configuration you saw here was all on a virtual machine. So I knew that when I released my IP address, I'm on a local console here. I'm just running VirtualBox. If we back out my screen just a bit, you'll see it's a separate machine here that's just running in a window on my normal desktop. So I'm running a Mac OS, running Windows on that. You are connecting and watching this on my Linux server. I got a little bit of everything going on with that piece. So that's just some examples of things you can do to be able to use these pieces. I want to now shift to some questions you sent me about the exam itself, the CompTIA Network Plus exam. It has a lot of technical components, but in some ways, there's just as many non-technical components associated with the exam. Before we get into those questions, I'll remind you, you can call in at 347-989-8745, or you can, of course, call in free on Skype at 855-235-4742. Those numbers also on professormesser.com/live at the bottom of that screen to be able to see those. The question that came in first was from Anthony that said, are these certifications really going to help me? Are they going to get my foot in the door? And can I do something with these? That seems to be the question of the moment. That going and being able to fight about whether certifications help or not. And I think that's one of the things that is an important consideration. You're going through this whole process of getting a certification. Is it really worth the time? Is this really going to help me? And if you've never gone into IT, you don't have your first IT position yet, there's a lot of questions about whether these are useful, because if you go to the internet, people are all over the place. Some people say certifications are worthless. They won't help you at all. Other people say it's very valuable to have certifications. If you look and I think one of the best ways to answer this is to go to a third party, one that is really asking the questions or really answering the questions about what the employers are asking for. So if you go to Career Builder, you go to DICE, you go to any of the online job posting boards and you search for these certifications, or you look for jobs that might interest you, look to see what they're asking for. If they're asking for a 4-year degree, they're asking for an A+ certification, a Network Plus certification, or any other certification, then you'll have some ideas about how valuable these certs are, especially to that particular employer. Some employers don't ask for any certifications. They don't care. Some people have a philosophical, they don't like certifications. That's fine too. It's good to know these things, but I think you'll find once you start looking at what the employers would like, they list those things, because as much as people are negative towards certifications, they do actually teach you something. I have the A Plus and the Network Plus and the Security Plus and many, many other certifications under my belt. And every time I take a certification exam, I'm learning something. So this is speaking from someone who's been in the IT industry and doing crazy things for many, 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 many years. And I've been at the help desk. I've been working in the data center. I've been doing server administration, client administration, corporate training, networking, packet analysis, security, you name it. I've gone through the mix of all of those different things, and I've taken certifications for all of those. There's always something new to learn. So I think someone who says that certifications aren't useful is someone who doesn't have the certification, or else they would realize, yes, that's absolutely useful for me. But it's not just certifications. If you take anything away from this particular question, it's not just about the cert. It's extremely useful to also have other things that will be useful. I mentioned earlier a formal type of training or formal type of education, a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, something where you have gone and learned more than just IT, or maybe you've focused on a single set of majors or a focus in education that was around IT-related subjects. Also, experience, extremely important. It's undeniable that also plays a role in how well you can communicate real-world problems to a potential employer. So it's not any one thing. It's a mixture of many different things. Certifications are, of course, helpful, but so is education, and so is some type of real-world experience, whether that's something where you've gotten money and professionally been in a job, or it's something maybe you volunteered and gotten a knowledge of how to do these things from someone else. Very, very useful to have those pieces. So thanks, Anthony, for that particular question. Let's go on also to a question that came in from April. It said, are the exams timed, and how much time do they give you? I think that's a good question. If you've never walked into an exam from CompTIA before and you're trying to determine if this is something where it's timed, or they're filling the blanks, what am I going to be faced with? I think the best place you can go is to the CompTIA website, and here it is. I'm going to go to, right at the top is a tab for certification. Kind of see it there over my head, next to my head. I'm going to click on that, and it takes us to the certification pages on CompTIA. And there's under Get Certified, let's go to Network Plus, and it tells you right on the front page of Network Plus, you can have information on here on the exam objectives, which you should absolutely download and look through them and read them and use them as a checklist. This will tell you everything you need to know about the exam. There's sample questions here, but you'll notice on down the page, it tells you there are a maximum of 100 questions. You get both multiple choice and performance-based questions. It's 90 minutes long. So let's look at these three things really quick. It's a maximum of 100 questions. What we're finding is that you might get a mixture of performance-based questions. You might get 4 or 5 performance-based questions and 80 multiple choice questions. It just depends on the types of questions you get and how they are being weighted by CompTIA. Every question, we believe, has a different value associated with it. So you can't take this on a percentage basis. It's more of collecting a certain number of points. In fact, they tell you that a passing score is that you have to get a 720 on a scale of 100 to 900. Uh-oh, now I've moved my mouse out and created a problem for myself. Let's see if I can fix this. I have a service that's running on my machine that's got a mouse that I could share across screens, and I left it up during the study group. We'll see if I'm able to get this back on this live piece. But that's where you have to go through and see what you can expect. If you go to YouTube and you search for CompTIA exam experience, I think it is, or candidate experience, CompTIA candidate experience, and you do that, you will be able to go out and get, I think it's a 15-minute video on what you can expect during the CompTIA exam. If you've never taken one of these exams before, that's a great video because it not only has descriptions of the CompTIA process and what you can expect to see, but it's also got some examples of performance-based questions as well. So something that you should consider and go through when you're working with that. Here's an example of what those those exam objectives look like, make sure that you go through the process with those exam objectives of being able to use them. I think that's an important consideration as well. You really need to know what you will be asked for. So download the objectives and have those available to you as well. Question that came in from Hassan is, how long does it take to complete the Network Plus after you've taken the A+ certification? Another good example of trying to figure out timing. And it's different for everyone in being able to use that. I think that when you start working with A+, there's a good chunk of networking in there. So that's going to help you when you're ready to take the Network Plus exam, but it's not going to be everything. You also have your local things, your local experiences, things you know as a person that you've worked with these technologies. Those will help you as well. I would think most people, if they sat down and they did nothing but study in 6 weeks, in 2 months, somewhere plus or minus there, you should be able to be ready for the Network Plus certification. The best way to know is that you would be able to go to your Network Plus exam objectives and just go through the list and check off as much as you can. When you've checked out pretty much everything, you're ready to go and sit for that exam. Very important on that piece. I don't have my mouse back, so we're going to continue on with these pieces and maybe getting the mouse back in the after show. I've also got somebody asked a question in the exam questions I got this month, which was, what can I expect to make in IT? Someone who's not in IT currently, they're moving into IT. What can I expect to really get from IT? Well, here's an example of the IT skills and salary report. This is at bit.ly/2013 IT skills or 2013 IT skills. Either way, you will get to this link where you can compare certifications and what people are making who have these certifications. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to take the cert and here's what you can make, but it does give you an idea of people who are in this role that have these particular certifications. Here's what they're making on average. So we can look at the mean and the median of both of these to be able to really see what people are doing. In fact, they have the number that they had there. I thought that was a great piece to go through. So if you're maybe looking, should I go this direction or go that direction? Maybe it's not just what you like to do, but maybe there's a monetary reason to go that direction as well. So something to consider when you're working through all of those. I will also, I've got questions for you as well. So one of the questions I have for you, we aren't going to that screen, we're going to this screen. There we go. I want to know what you'd like to cover. So as we're closing things up, we're finishing things up here. I want to know what things you would like to be able to see for the next time when we do this study group. I do one every month, so I have a lot of questions that come through. So of course, I want to know what you would like to be able to see as well. So go out to vot.rs, and I think this number is right, 826815. Let's see if it is. 826815. I'm going to plug it. I'm going to bring it up on my screen and see if it's there. There we go. vot.rs. 826815. Let's do that. I probably should just done this on my mobile device and see if it is. Okay, yes, that is the right address. This one is not multiple choice. This is one you can type in. I can pull up my dashboard and have a look at this on my side and see what these things are. Go to vot.rs, and that number again is, as I pull it up on my side, hopefully somebody got that in the chat, 826815. The topics that you would like to cover next time on this. See, it's good to have a couple of machines. Some of you were asking, what in the world do you have with all of these machines that are here? Well, it's always good to have an extra one sitting around and being able to do this. Some of you said acronyms would be good. Some of you said cloud computing. Cloud computing, obviously, a huge topic, not only for your exams, maybe not huge in the exam, certainly huge in the industry, but your exams, it's something good to know as well with cloud computing. How to configure routers, a little bit outside the scope of the Network Plus. Lots of command line. We did a little command line this time because you always want command line, and I'll keep that in mind also as well for next month. how to get the CEU for the cert you already have. Make sure if you're watching this live and you would like to get your certification or get credit for watching this, the secret code you can send me is cloud computing. That way, if you send me an email that said, yeah, I watched this whole thing, you said cloud computing at the end, can I please get credit? I will send you an email that has credit for your CEUs. Routing protocols, that's another good one to go through. We didn't even have time to step through all of those pieces on here, but certainly a good one. What network topologies do people use the most? You can almost guess on what that one might happen to be. Configuration of the server, how to start the servers up. We don't do a lot of server-specific configuration on the Network Plus, primarily because there's not a lot of specific operating systems on there. It's really focused on networking, so probably won't do a lot of those pieces. Let's see. Now that we've got folks that have sent those in, I can show you what I see on my side with these pieces that are coming through. So you've sent in quite a few, and I really do appreciate everything that you've sent in, being able to see all of these things. This is what allows me to do this study group every month. So getting your feedback and understanding more about the things that are important to you are incredibly useful for putting together this content. I really couldn't do it. I sit down Friday night getting ready to do these, and I go through that list and I try to figure out what are we going to talk about this month? Are we going to have enough? And of course, we always have way more than I ever expected. Much more than I ever expected. Really fantastic to have that there. Well, before we finish up today, I have a few things to go through. First, my Network Plus study guide is available if you'd like to see more about that. It's at professormesser.com/netsg. Of course, watch what we do on YouTube. Subscribe and give a thumbs up to those videos that you like. Go to professormesser.com/YouTube. professormesser.com/Twitter. I do have some Google Plus going on at professormesser.com/Google Plus, and on Facebook as well /Facebook. Again, we want to give our thanks out to GTS Learning for helping support what we're doing here. Their vouchers, of course, something I don't really get any revenue from, but it's something that I think saves people some money, and they're nice enough to allow me to put their voucher code on the Professor Messer website at professormesser.com/vouchers. Of course, you can see more about the labs at professormesser.com/netlabs. And of course, thanks to all of you. Thanks for sitting through the study group and giving me your questions and participating in the chat room. We really couldn't do it without you. I want to thank everyone for joining us this month, and we'll see you next time on the Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group.